Welcome to Reading the Bible Together and to Genesis chapter 50, the last chapter in this astonishing series of stories and events which has shaped the way our world understands itself and the God who made us. But before we get to a summary, that's for next time, let's look at all that's happening in chapter 50, and that's a lot. Now, we ended last time with the death of Jacob, and now we're still at the bedside where Joseph demonstrates his grief, weeping over his father. What happens next is a surprise. Joseph commands that his father be embalmed. Now, that's quite different from Jewish custom. To this day, embalming is not practiced by Jews. In fact, in Jewish tradition, you conduct your burial within 24 hours of death so that the unembalmed body would return to the dust from which it was formed, as in Genesis chapter 3, verse 19, where it says, "For dust you are, and to dust you will return." But Joseph has been fully integrated into Egyptian society, and so the embalming and the periods of mourning which follow are all according to Egyptian rather than to Jewish custom. Now, we're used to the idea of Egyptian mummification, but it's important to remember that this process, which was incredibly complicated and time-consuming and extensive, was reserved only for the royal and the rich and the powerful. Now, it's a sign of the regard in which Joseph was held and a sign of his wealth and influence that the rite of mummification was accorded to his father Jacob. The embalming takes 40 days, and the official period of mourning takes 70 days. Now, these numbers are used throughout the Old Testament. They're rounded off to indicate a long time, 40 days, a long time, and 70, a really long time. Now, Egyptian records indicate that the official period of mourning is actually 72 days. So we know these numbers are rounded off here. You might remember that the family of Jacob, as they entered Egypt, was numbered at 70, which is a rounding off made possible only by eliminating Dinah from the census. Poor Dinah never gets a break. In a scene reminiscent of the Exodus, and in fact, this whole chapter is filled with clues pointing us to that event, Joseph asks Pharaoh for permission to leave Egypt and travel to Canaan in order to fulfill Jacob's request to be buried there. He also, you notice, promises to return. Pharaoh grants permission, and not only that, Pharaoh sends noblemen and chariots and horsemen for protection on the journey. Later in Exodus, a Pharaoh will again send chariots and horsemen, but the goal in Exodus will not be protection, but the destruction of the Hebrew nation. In fact, the whole trip will sort of mirror the Exodus, including the route they take. We're told when they reached the threshing floor of Atad near the Jordan. What are they doing there? You see, going by way of the Jordan is a significant detour from the most logical and much shorter path, a shorter path which indeed was marked by a major Egyptian highway. Instead of coming up and then along the coast of the Mediterranean and then instead to get where the Bible describes them going, they had to go well past the coast and then come back in this way across the Jordan. So there they are at the Jordan, at the very same spot where the Hebrew nation will cross into the promised land at the conclusion of the Exodus some 500 years later, very close to Jericho. In fact, the very same place where John the Baptist is going to be having his ministry of baptism, where Jesus is ultimately baptized, a place now known as Khazar el-Yahud. You see, Genesis is like a time machine here, both looking back in time to the creation of the world and looking forward to the establishment of the nation in the promised land, and even looking forward to the establishment of Jesus as the Messiah, the Lamb of God. So, It looks as though Jacob, mummified though he may be, is given his own personal exodus, just as God had promised back in chapter 46 when he told Jacob, I will go down to Egypt with you and I will surely bring you back again. And that promise will come true as this foretells for the entire nation as well, but not for 5 centuries. So, the whole entourage arrives in the promised land. And now having arrived, they leave Egyptian custom behind and they follow the Hebrew tradition. We read, when they reached the threshing floor of Atad near the Jordan, they lamented loudly and bitterly, for there Joseph observed a 7-day period of mourning for his father. Now, that 7-day period of mourning is observed by Jews to this day. It is known as sitting Shiva, following the burial of a loved one, which, remember, happens within 24 hours after death. There is 7 days in which friends and family can come from afar and pay their respects to the family of the person who died. The difference here is that the burial in this story follows the period of the difference here is that the burial is after that 7 days of mourning, since Jacob had already been embalmed. In Jewish tradition, subsequent to that and afterwards, the burial happens and then the 7-day period of mourning. Now, this is true in the days of Jesus as well. You might recall how in the New Testament, Lazarus was entombed immediately after his death. And when Jesus arrives 4 days later, the period of mourning is still taking place. The family was sitting Shiva. That's what the women, also returning to Jesus' tomb, were intending to do as well. But their plans were, of course, radically changed by the resurrection. I should note here that while both Jesus and Lazarus, according to the customs of the day, were wrapped in a shroud, and with the burial of Jesus, we're told that a significant amount of spices were used, that's not to be confused with mummification or with embalming. Don't think about Jesus wrapped up like a mummy. In fact, what happened with Jesus and with Lazarus is a simple wrapping in a shroud for modesty's sake. And the spices were used to mask the odor, which would be significant after several days, making the mourning time less unpleasant for the family who'd be visiting the place of burial. But let's go back to Genesis. So following this period of mourning and the placing of Jacob among the patriarchs in Mamre, or Hebron as it is now known, the entire entourage returns to Egypt. Little did they know it would be many, many years before they could leave again. Now, that isn't the end of this chapter. That's nothing near the end of this chapter, but it is the end of our time today because there's so much more in chapter 50. Amazing things. And the climax of the story, that it'll take us chapter 50, part 2, to finish it. We will see you then.